everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my recent reads for 2021. This is the first time I'm doing a recent reads video. I'm changing my setup from monthly wrap-ups to recent reads just because my monthly reading has been a bit inconsistent, and I find some months I'm reading like 2 books and some months I'm reading 4 or 5 books. So I just figured I don't always have enough books per month to do a monthly wrap-up, so we're doing a recent reads instead. The beginning of 2021 has been a little bit weird for me with reading. I was a bit slumpy for a while. I wasn't feeling like reading. My mind just wasn't in the game. It wasn't in the reading game. And I think part of that is also because I have a very mixed bag of books. I have 5 stars and 2 stars and a lot of 3 stars. So I think I was struggling a bit because I wasn't really loving everything I was reading. And so it just made my reading slower and slower. So I am excited to talk to you about them, though. It took me this long to read 10 books. So we're going to do the first 10 books that I've read so far in 2021. The first book that I finished in January was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And this was the first time I'd read a Riley Sager book. I'm not a big thriller reader, but I've kind of dipped my toes into the genre here and there. And this one really worked for me. There's a haunted house at the center of this thriller. There is a young lady who has inherited this house from her family, and this house has some strange secrets. It has a strange background. This book is actually based on Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, which I was also watching at the same time of reading this book. So that was an interesting experience because they're very different. The TV show Haunting of Hill House has a similar premise to this, but it takes it in a much different direction than this one does. But if you're familiar with Shirley Jackson's original story, you will have a good basis for this, and I had wished I had actually read that before I read this one. Another thing I liked about this one was just the way it was told. I thought was very interesting and creative. It blends fact and fiction a bit. So you have 2 storylines. You have one storyline of the main character, and then you have another storyline where you're actually reading the fictional story that her father is writing about the house. So the father had written this book about their haunted house, and you actually get to read excerpts of the book while you're also following the main story of his daughter. So I thought that was really neat. I really actually enjoyed sometimes the fiction a little bit more than I enjoyed the main storyline. I will say I think the main character of this is sometimes a little bit grating. I just didn't really love the main character of this book. My buddy read this book with Vish from Books with V, and we both ended up really liking it. There's some scary moments that we both felt were pretty gripping. I'm not an expert on like scary things, so maybe it's not that scary to another person, but it was scary to me. This was fun, and I didn't expect how it wrapped up. I didn't see it coming, but I know a lot of people who have read a lot of thrillers before said that they did see the ending coming of this book, and then it was kind of obvious. So it's not obvious to me, so I had a good time. I'm giving this book 4 stars. The next book that I read was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I had technically read this before, but I had listened to it on audio, and it wasn't a particularly good audiobook, and I didn't have a good time listening to it. So this time, I went between physically reading it and listening to another audiobook that was a little bit better. The narrator was better. So this time, I absolutely loved it. This was 5 stars for me easily. Of course, I'm familiar with the Pride and Prejudice story already. I've watched adaptations of Pride and Prejudice many times, but I hadn't really spent a lot of time with the actual text, so this was such a joy and such a delight. I absolutely love Pride and Prejudice. I want to maybe read all of Jane Austen's 6 novels this year, but I am a bit behind on that. I think Jane Austen July, I'm really gonna go all out for Jane Austen July because I do really want to read her 6 main novels. I've read now Emma, I read last year, and now I've read Pride and Prejudice. I still need to read the rest, so I have some reading to do for Jane Austen, but absolutely love Pride and Prejudice. 5 stars. Another 5-star book for me this year was Rhythm of War. This took me a really long time to finish. I started it in December and didn't finish it till the end of January, so it took me a couple months to read. This took me a while, but I did give it 5 stars in the end. The weird thing about this one was I wasn't always loving the journey through the book. I had some pacing issues with it. I have a whole book review that goes into spoilers and everything. I can link that for you if you're interested. But it was hard for me for a while to see kind of where the book was going. But of course, Brandon Sanderson always ends the book with just an amazing Sanderlanche. And this book, a lot of it felt like a Sanderlanche. There was actually like a bit of a Sanderlanche in the middle, where the middle of the book felt like it could have been the end. Which I know people have different opinions on how long these books are and should they be that long. You definitely could have had half the amount of things happen in this book and it still would have made for a really good book. But I don't mind the length at this point. It's just a given with Stormlight Archives and it's just something I expect now. And there are huge consequences for the world going forward. I think book 5 is going to be totally crazy and I cannot wait, although I have to wait at least 3 years. But loved this in the end. 5 stars as well. Love Stormlight Archives, of course. The next book that I read was a weird one. It was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So this is the 4th Hunger Games book that she released following President Snow and his backstory. It's definitely a weird premise, and if you're gonna revisit Hunger Games, I don't know why she picked that exactly. I know there's different interviews with the author that I have watched, and I can see what she was thinking at the time, but I just don't think her fan base really wanted this book or really needed it. I think if we were gonna revisit the Hunger Games, we would have had a lot more fun revisiting different aspects of the story, and I didn't think that his backstory really stuck the landing in the end. I think what got me about this one was the ending. His character changes a bit abruptly. At least it felt abrupt. I think if she was going to do what she was going to do with President Snow, I think she should have done it a little bit more gradually. It just felt kind of fast, although parts of this book felt really slow as well. It's a weird one. I didn't hate reading it, but I did also read the audiobook and I didn't like the audiobook. It wasn't done very well. There's a lot of music in this book, which is actually very important to the story. And the narrator of the audiobook doesn't really do anything with the music part. I wish they had like sung the songs or put a little more effort into it. And the narrator just like reads the lines of the songs verbatim and he doesn't do a very good job. And so I didn't like the audiobook. So that definitely affected my enjoyment. It always does. I think I finished this book physically reading because the audiobook I just couldn't handle anymore. It was just annoying me. But yeah, I just don't think this story really stuck the landing. I'm somewhere between like 2 and 3 stars. I think 3, I think I'll be more generous because there was some interesting world building that happened and there is some interesting backstory, but we didn't need this book and President Snow is not a character I really care about. And we all know that he's evil in the end. Like, you know what's going to happen to him. I think you can do villain backstories, but I think they can be done better. So this did not hit the mark for me. Maybe 2.5, 3 stars. My buddy read this also with Amanda from her Pacific Northwest Washington life, and she felt similarly to me too. Neither one of us really loved this. I think she might have rated it a little lower, maybe 2. I can't remember. Yeah, she gave it 2 or 3 stars as well. So neither one of us really liked this one that much. The next book I absolutely loved, and that was My Lady Jane by 3 authors, Cynthia Hand, Brodi, Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. My Lady Jane is a historical fiction retelling of Jane Grey, and I just had so much fun with this. I also had the audiobook for this going. I sometimes read physically, sometimes listened to it. The audiobook of this is very good. I highly recommend it. The narrator of this audiobook is hilarious. And actually, it was more fun, I think, listening to this than it even was physically reading it. So I really enjoyed this one. It has a lot of like Monty Python and the Holy Grail humor. So if that's your thing, which it is my thing, but if that's your thing, you're gonna love this. If you're not as into like that kind of silly humor, this may fall flat for you. Humor is, I know, very like specific to your taste, but this one really landed well for me, and it's just hilarious. There's a bit of a magical element to it as well, which is a big part of the humor. So if you don't buy into that magical element, I could see someone maybe thinking this book is kind of lame. But if you buy into the magical element of it, I think it's a lot of fun. And so weirdly, I'm giving this very silly book 5 stars. It feels like too silly to give it 5 stars, but at the same time, I have nothing bad to say about it. So 5 stars. It wasn't like a life-changing book or anything, but it was a lot of fun and I would totally read it again. So yeah, I really liked this. I've heard the next few books in the series follow different historical figures, and they don't necessarily all hit the right way for everybody. I know some people really don't like the, I think, 3rd book, so I do want to try the other books in the series, but I'm going into them a little bit hesitantly based on what people have said. So loved this first one though. So the next few books are also historical fiction because I participated in the Historathon, which my Lady Jane was also for Historathon, which happened in February. The next historical fiction book that I picked up was Library of Legends by Janie Chang, and unfortunately I didn't love this one. I actually gave it 2 stars, I think. This had all the makings of a book that I was gonna totally love. I expected to love it, and it just didn't work for me. So this premise is following a group of Chinese university students in 1937, and what I think is the cool thing about this book is it follows a historical event that I didn't really know anything about. This follows when Japan was actually dropping bombs onto China, which I didn't really know about that conflict at all. So we have our Chinese university students fleeing from these bomb raids, and they are traveling with this set of documents, which is basically the summation of all of their mythology and folk tales, and they have this whole like record database, basically, physical copies that they are protecting, and they are taking it from the university and fleeing the university because it's going to be bombed. So our main perspective is a young lady named Leanne, and we also see some perspective of sort of a love interest of Leanne's, and his name, what's his name? His name is Liu Xiaoming. And so we go between their perspectives. I didn't think that was very effective. I definitely was more interested in our female character, and I didn't feel like the male character was written very well. I think if it was just her perspective, it maybe would have worked better for me. But what really kind of didn't do it for me was the magical element in this. So this is a little bit of some magical realism. We interact actually with some of the Chinese mythological gods, and so they sort of start to play a part in this story as well. And it never felt believable to me. I think just the blending of the two just didn't feel real to me in any way. So I just kind of thought this would have been a much better, like, straight historical telling of the story, because it was an interesting period of history that I didn't know anything about and I really wanted to learn more about, but I felt like we got distracted a bit by the magical element, and it didn't have the right tone to have the magical element in there as well. It has pretty good ratings on Goodreads, so I know a lot of people liked this book a lot, but for some reason this just did not work for me, and I wished the magical part of it had just been deleted completely. 2 stars, disappointing. We'll probably unhaul this one. Don't expect to read it again. Another book that I finished for Historathon was All the Light You Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I buddy read this with the lovely Melissa from Libraries and Labradors, and I really loved this book in the end. I think most of the people that were reading it along with Melissa, and Melissa herself gave it like 3.5, 4 stars, but I seemed to like it the most out of the group. This is a World War II novel that follows, again, dual perspectives. We go between Marie, who is a young lady who is blind. We follow her from like pretty young teenager and then through the war and her experiences. And then we also follow a young man named Werner. And Werner is being recruited for the Hitler Youth. He's an orphan. He doesn't have a lot of support from family, and he gets swept up. He was a perfect kind of candidate that would have been recruited by Hitler Youth and wouldn't have a lot of like family support to kind of like, I don't know, tell him otherwise. So he gets swept up and is trained as a Hitler Youth soldier. I loved both perspectives. Usually with a dual perspective, I like one more than another, but with this one, I really enjoyed both of them, and I think that's really hard to do. It's a bit more literary in its style. The writing style really worked for me. It's beautiful writing. It's definitely highly, highly crafted, a bit flowery, so that might turn off some people depending on how you like that, but I loved it, and I thought that the themes in this book were definitely so dark and depressing, but so real. This is a very gritty World War II book. It's very sad, but I thought it just was very impactful. I did cry at the end, and yeah, I would definitely read this again. I think I'm actually going to give it 4.5, 5 stars. I'm not sure if it's fully 5 stars now thinking back on it. It might be more like 4.5, but really liked this World War II novel. It is a Pulitzer Prize winner. Very well written. Worth your time, I would say. The next book was also a buddy read. Lots of buddy reads in the first part of my year, which is great. I read this one with Laura from Let's Get Fictional, and we read the first book in Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. And she was actually rereading this one, and this was the first time for me. I don't think I'm going to be continuing with the series. I liked it well enough. I had fun with it to a certain point, and then at the end I kind of didn't like it anymore. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to be continuing with the series. This follows a young teenage boy who has a bit of a traumatic experience and loses his grandfather, and basically his grandfather dies right in front of him. And there are many mysterious circumstances that surround the grandfather's death, including our teenage character sees a creepy monster in the woods kind of by the house and suspects that that creepy monster killed the grandfather. And so the rest of the book is figuring out the backstory of the creepy monsters and the grandfather was involved with this Home for Peculiar Children. And he ends up visiting some people who can give him some information about this creepy backstory with these orphans and Miss Peregrine who took care of the orphans. And the grandfather was wrapped up in that orphanage when he was younger. I liked this well enough. I liked the vibes and I liked the creepiness. I felt like the ending is what killed it for me. It doesn't really deal with parents and family very well. It's kind of typical YA where like the parents are evil and only the kids know anything that's good, you know. So I don't always love that theme where the parents are dumb and the kid knows everything. So I didn't love that part of it. I also felt like it was gratuitously violent for being aimed at a younger audience, and it was pretty gruesome at the end. It just didn't feel like it was really appropriate. Maybe it could have backed off on the gratuitous violence at the end, but I'm sure plenty of people love this series. It's highly loved, highly followed. I believe the last book is out now, so if this sounds like something for you, I still would recommend it. It was a fun read, but I just didn't like it enough to continue with the series at this point, so 3 stars about. Okay, so my camera stopped filming, so I apologize if anything changed with the angle. I feel like it might have, so sorry about that. But let's talk next about Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. Echo was the only middle grade book that I finished in the month of March. It was very sad. I had grand plans for middle grade March and they did not come to fruition, but I did read one. So I read Echo, and I actually listened to Echo on audiobook, And that is the way to go with this one. This is a World War II middle grade novel, and it is absolutely the way to go. If you listen to it, you will be blessed by beautiful music, and the music is a big part of the story. So I think it's really important to the story itself. I wouldn't actually recommend reading it physically because the audiobook is done so well. However, I didn't love the story of this book and the way it was written. It is multi-perspective, but the problem I had with it is we would follow one character for a really long time and become very attached to them and very invested in their story. And then the author would do this cliffhanger thing and be like, dun, 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 and then abruptly change to another perspective. And then you didn't see that character again until the end of the book. Literally, till the end of the book. And that was really annoying. I actually thought while I was listening to the audiobook that possibly my app had just like switched to another book and I didn't realize it. So I looked at it and I was like, wait, no, I'm still listening to Echo, but now it's a different narrator and a different story completely. So I didn't like that. The story itself wasn't the best for me, but I think if you're interested in this one, it's worth it to do the audiobook. The audiobook is stellar. One of the best high quality audiobooks I've ever listened to. So I know a lot of people love this book, and I seem to be very much in the minority on this one. But I know a few other people have felt the same way, including Summer from Summer's Moving Bookshelf. She let me know that she felt the same way I did. So take what you will from that. I know a lot of people who rave about this novel, but I didn't like it. I shouldn't say I didn't like it. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. 3 stars. And the last book I want to talk to you about is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I was part of a read-along for this book with Christy Lewis, Codex Cantina, and Peg from the History Shelf. It was a wonderful experience. We have a whole bunch of live shows on it. We read it over 2 months, and I will link those live shows down below in case you want to check them out. But this was a great experience to read with a group. I was only loosely familiar with some Russian novels before this. I had read one other Dostoevsky. Back in October, we read Crime and Punishment with another group. And so I did know Dostoevsky's style already. I think if you're going to try Dostoevsky, you should try Crime and Punishment first. I think it's a little bit more accessible than this one. This one was very valuable for me to read, but I didn't love the experience, but I absolutely think this is a classic worth reading. I think just a lot of it did go over my head. There are a lot of references and allusions to things that were going on at the time of Russian history, and I don't have as good of a grasp of Russian history to really understand fully the impact of what is going on in this book. So I do think it's a classic worth reading, but I think I should probably learn more about Russia, come back to this one, and see if I get more out of it. The story centers around 3 brothers and 1 father, and they all kind of have very different issues that they're grappling with. They all kind of represent a different philosophy as well. I think the pacing of this book was very interesting. It does jump around to different sections, and we even get like different people's accounts in the middle of it, and accounts about the backstories of different characters, and all of that works together to create one cohesive story. And I think it's just really important, if you try to read this book, that you know something about Dostoevsky's life. You need to know something about the Russian history of the time of the 1800s. And I also think it's valuable to know a little bit about what Dostoevsky himself was dealing with. He wrote this book after losing his own child, and so some of the themes are very consistent with what he probably would have been asking himself. A big question in this book is, why do bad things happen to good people? And that is really a centerpiece of this book and what Dostoevsky kind of tries to tackle. I think another thing that made me not like this one as much as I liked Crime and Punishment was that I felt like the ending ends a little bit more on a whimper rather than a bang, and it just feels a little bit open-ended. There was some talk in our read-along group about how there might have been a sequel to this book, and it definitely feels like there should have been a sequel, but unfortunately Dostoevsky dies after writing this book like pretty shortly after writing this book. So it does end a little bit open-ended, and I just wish we had a little bit more information about what happens to some of our characters. Overall, I'm glad that I read it, but I don't think I got everything that I probably should have out of this book. Maybe I'll revisit it someday. I don't know when I'm going to feel like revisiting it. It's going to be a while, but I could see myself coming back to this one maybe someday under the right circumstances. But I'm giving it 3 stars. I understand that this is a really important classic and that it's very lauded for a lot of good reasons, but just personally, I struggled through it a lot, so I can't fully say that I loved this book. I'm giving it 3 stars as well. We are in the 3-star slump, apparently. And those are the first 10 books that I read in 2021. So I have read a few more things since then, but I'm going to wait for another wrap up because this video is going to be plenty long. Let me know if you have read any of these books, if you plan to after hearing me talk about them. And I would love to know what's your favorite book that you have read so far this year. I have a Discord and an Instagram and a Goodreads that you can follow. I have the links down below if you want to check out some of my other social media that's related to books. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching and for being here today. Keep reading great books, and until next time, bye-bye.